I'm Abigail, 29, standing in my wedding dress, heart pounding in a small church. The air smells of roses, but something feels off. Minutes before walking down the aisle, I overhear David, my fiancé, laughing with his best man. It's a bet, he says, to marry me for my family's money. My locket, Mom's last gift, slips from my shaking hands, hitting the floor. My dream day shatters. How do you rebuild when trust breaks? Where are you watching from? Like and subscribe to hear my journey. The church's back room smelled of old wood and my own perfume, too sweet now, clogging my throat. I stood frozen, my white dress, heavy, the locket still on the floor where it fell. David's voice echoed in my head, his laugh sharp like broken glass. I needed to see his face to know if this was real. My heels clicked as I moved toward the side door where he stood with his best man, their whispers low but clear. David. I said, my voice a cracked whisper. He turned eyes wide like a kid caught stealing. What did you mean, the bet? His face softened, but it felt rehearsed. Abigail, you misheard. It was a joke, I swear. His best man. Greg shifted, avoiding my gaze. A joke. My hands shook, clutching the satin of my skirt. You said you'd win big marrying me. For my family's money. David stepped closer, his cologne sharp. Baby, you're upset. Let's talk after the ceremony. No. My voice hardened. Tell me now. Greg coughed, muttering something about checking on guests, and slipped away. David's jaw tightened, his charm slipping. You're making a scene, Abigail. This is our day. Our day? I laughed bitter, my chest tight. Was any of it real, David? Or just a game to you? He reached for my hand, but I pulled back, my ring catching the light. The room spun, faces of guests blurring through the cracked door. My best friend Hannah stood near the altar, adjusting flowers, oblivious. I wanted to scream to tell everyone, but my feet moved before my mind caught up. I grabbed my purse from the chair, leaving the veil crumpled like a discarded promise. The side door creaked as I pushed through, sunlight blinding me. Guests milled outside, their laughter jarring. Abigail, you okay? Someone called, but I kept walking, my dress dragging on the gravel. My car was parked behind the church, a rental for the day, keys still in my purse. I slid inside, the leather seat cold against my bare shoulders. My hands shook as I started the engine, David's voice still looping in my mind. I drove, not knowing where, the road blurring through tears. The radio played some pop song, too cheerful, so I turned it off. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I ended up at a gas station, the neon sign flickering. My dress looked absurd in the grimy mirror of the restroom. I splashed water on my face, mascara streaking. The cashier, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Sarah, watched me as I wandered the aisles, pretending to browse. You all right, hon? She asked, her voice soft like she'd seen lost souls before. I nodded, but my throat closed up. She slid a bottle of water across the counter. On me. You look like you need it. Thanks. I managed, my voice raw. I sipped the water, the cold grounding me for a moment. Sarah didn't push, just busied herself with receipts, giving me space. I pulled out my phone, scrolling past missed calls from David, from Hannah, from my father. I couldn't face them. I thought of Aunt Nora, her gruff voice, her small village hours away. She'd been my safe place growing up after Mom died. I dialed her number, my hands still trembling. Abigail. Her voice was sharp, surprised. What's wrong? I can't do it, Nora. I said, tears spilling again. The wedding. David. I need to get away. Can I stay with you? There was a pause, too long. My house is full, kid, she said finally. Got my cousin's family staying over. But the old bakery's empty. You can crash there. The bakery, I pictured her cozy farmhouse, the quilts, the warm kitchen. The bakery, I repeated, my voice small. It's got a cot, a sink. It's yours if you need it. Her tone was firm, no room for argument. I swallowed hard, the rejection stinging. Okay, I'll come. Drive safe, she said, then hung up. I thanked Sarah, her eyes soft with understanding, and got back in the car. The bakery wasn't home, wasn't even close to what I needed. But it was somewhere to go, somewhere to hide. As I pulled onto the highway, the weight of David's words pressed harder, and Nora's distance cut deeper. What had I done to end up here alone in a dress meant for a fairy tale? The highway stretched endless, my headlights cutting through the dusk. My wedding dress bunched awkwardly around my knees, the satin now creased and smudged from the gas station floor. I kept the windows down, letting the cool air whip my hair, trying to drown out the ache in my chest. Nora's words looped in my mind, the bakery, not her house. I'd always been her favorite, the kid she'd sneak extra cookies to when Dad wasn't looking. Why was she pushing me away now? I stopped at a diner an hour out, my stomach growling despite the knot in my gut. The place was half empty, fluorescent lights buzzing. I slid into a booth, still in my dress, ignoring the stares from a trucker and a waitress wiping tables. My phone buzzed again, Hannah's name flashing. I let it go to voicemail, too raw to explain. Instead, I ordered coffee, the mug warm against my palms, grounding me. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Diane, refilled my cup without asking. "Rough day." She said, her voice low, not prying but open. I nodded, my throat tight. "You could say that." She didn't push, just left a slice of pie beside my coffee. "Cherry. Helps sometimes." Her small kindness made my eyes sting, but I held it together, picking at the crust. I needed to keep moving to reach Nora's village before I fell apart completely. Back on the road, the sky darkened, stars poking through. I thought about Mom, how she'd braid my hair before bed. Her voice soft as she told me I'd always be enough. If she were here, she'd know what to say. But she wasn't, and Dad had pushed me toward David, always talking about his family's wealth, their connections. Had he known about the bet? The thought twisted like a knife. Nora's village came into view just after midnight, a cluster of lights nestled between rolling hills. The bakery sat at the edge of town, a squat building with peeling paint and a faded sign, Nora's Sweets. I parked, my hands stiff on the wheel. The air smelled of damp grass and distant wood smoke, unfamiliar and cold. I grabbed my duffel from the trunk, the only thing I'd packed in my rush to leave. Inside the bakery was worse than I'd imagined. Dust coated the counter, cobwebs strung across the ceiling. A single cot sat in the back room, its blanket thin and musty. I dropped my bag, the floor creaking under my weight. My dress caught on a splintered chair, tearing a small rip in the hem. I laughed, a hollow sound, because what else could I do? I sank onto the cot, the springs groaning. My phone lit up with another voicemail, this time from Dad. "Abigail, come home," he said, his voice clipped. "You're being dramatic. David's a good man." I deleted it, my fingers trembling. Good man. David's laugh, his casual cruelty played on repeat. And Dad, always so practical, had never once asked what I wanted. I wandered the bakery, my flashlight beam catching old baking pans stacked in a corner. A cracked mirror hung on one wall, reflecting my pale face, the dress now a mockery. I unzipped it, letting it pool on the floor, and pulled on jeans and a sweater from my bag. The chill seeped into my bones, but I couldn't stop moving. I found a broom and started sweeping the rhythm, calming my racing thoughts. Under a counter, I spotted a tin box rusted at the edges. Inside were Nora's recipe cards, her looping handwriting faded but legible. Cinnamon rolls, lemon tarts, things she'd made when I was a kid. One card had a note scrawled in the margin, "For Abigail when she's ready." My chest tightened. Ready for what? To be alone in this wreck of a place. A knock at the door startled me. A man stood outside, his silhouette tall against the glass. "Hello?" he called, his voice cautious. I hesitated, gripping the broom like a weapon, then opened the door a crack. "I'm Lucas," he said, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Live down the road. Nora asked me to check on you." His eyes, dark and steady, scanned my face, not the dress crumpled in the corner. "I'm fine," I said, too sharp. He nodded, unfazed, and handed me a thermos. "Coffee. It's cold in there." He glanced past me at the dusty chaos. "Need help with anything?" I shook my head, my throat tight again. "Just tired." "All right. I'm close by if you change your mind." He left his boots crunching on the gravel. I closed the door, the thermos warm in my hands. His kindness, like Sarah's and Diane's, felt like a lifeline, but it wasn't enough to dull the hurt. Nora's rejection, Dad's dismissal, David's betrayal. They pressed in heavy and relentless. As I sipped the coffee, staring at the recipe cards, I wondered if I'd made a mistake coming here, if I'd ever find a place to belong again. The bakery smelled of dust and old sugar, the kind that clings to the air no matter how much I swept. I'd been here 3 days sleeping on that creaky cot, waking to the same ache in my chest. Lucas's thermos sat empty on the counter, a reminder of his brief visit, but I hadn't seen him since. I didn't want company, not when every thought circled back to David's voice, his laugh slicing through me. I scrubbed the counter harder, my knuckles raw, trying to erase the memory. I found more of Nora's recipe cards tucked behind a warped shelf. Her handwriting felt like a whisper from another life, one where I wasn't this broken version of myself. I tried baking, following her notes for a simple cornbread. The oven was ancient, the heat uneven, but the act of mixing flour and eggs gave my hands something to do besides tremble. The first batch burned, the acrid smell filling the room. I tossed it, my frustration bubbling over. Why was everything so hard? My phone buzzed again, David's name lighting up the screen. Another voicemail. I shouldn't have listened, but my finger hit play before I could stop it. "Abigail, you're being ridiculous," he said, his voice smooth like he was selling something. "Come back. We can fix this." In the background, Greg's laugh cut through sharp and mocking, just like at the church. I deleted it, my heart-pounding anger flaring hot in my veins. Fix this. He thought I'd crawl back. After that, I kept cleaning, dragging a bucket of soapy water to the front windows. They were grimy, streaked with years of neglect. As I scrubbed, I caught my reflection, pale and hollow-eyed, a stranger in my own skin. I hated how small I felt, how David's words had carved out pieces of me. Had he ever loved me, or was I just a pawn in his game? The sponge slipped from my hand, splashing water across my shoes. A knock startled me. Lucas stood outside, a toolbox in one hand, a paper bag in the other. "Nora said the windows need fixing," he called through the glass. I opened the door, wary but too tired to argue. "Thanks," I said, stepping back. He set the bag on the counter, the smell of fresh bread wafting out. "Made these this morning," he said, unpacking rolls. "Figured you might be hungry." I nodded, unsure how to respond to his kindness. He started measuring the window frames, his movements steady, unhurried. "Heard about your wedding," he said, not looking at me. "Folks in town talk. David's got a reputation, you know. Always was too slick." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Lucas hammered a nail, his eyes focused. "Charmed his way through half the county. Made bets on everything, girls included. Didn't think he'd pull that on you, though." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "You knew him," my voice was sharp, accusing, though I didn't mean it to be. "Went to school with him," Lucas said, setting down his hammer. "He was always playing angles. Sorry you got caught up in it." I turned away, my hands clenching. The idea that David's betrayal wasn't just personal, but part of some pattern made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, to break something, but all I did was grab another recipe card, my fingers smudging the ink. Lucas worked quietly, the sound of his tools filling the silence. I didn't know if I trusted him, but his words stuck, each one a new cut. My phone rang again, this time my father. I ignored it, but the buzzing felt like a pulse, relentless. I pictured his face, stern and disappointed, always pushing me toward what he thought was best. He'd introduced me to David, bragged about his family's wealth at every dinner. Had he seen the signs and ignored them? The thought burned my anger, shifting from David to him. I threw the recipe card down, my breath short. The walls of the bakery closing in. How had my life unraveled so fast? I stood by the counter, the recipe card crumpled in my fist, Lucas's words about David's reputation clawing at me. The bakery's air felt stale, pressing against my skin. I wanted to believe Lucas was wrong, that David's charm had meant something, but the truth sat heavy in my gut. My phone buzzed again, my father's name flashing. I let it ring, each vibration a reminder of his voice telling me to go back to David, to fix things, like it was my fault. I moved to the back room, needing space from Lucas's steady hammering. The cot sagged under me as I sat staring at the tin box of Nora's recipes. I opened it again, desperate for something to hold on to. Tucked between the cards was a photo yellowed at the edges. Mom and Nora, young arms around each other in this very bakery, their smiles bright. Mom's eyes sparkled so unlike the tired woman I remembered before she got sick. Seeing her here in this crumbling place twisted something deep inside me. Why had Nora never told me about this? My phone lit up with another voicemail. I hesitated, then played it, my father's voice sharp. Abigail, this is embarrassing. You're throwing away a good future. Call me back. No warmth, no question about how I felt. Just his demands, like when he'd pushed me to study business instead of art, to date David instead of anyone else. I deleted the message, my hands shaking. Had he always seen me as a means to an end, just like David? I paced the bakery, the floorboards groaning under my steps. The photo of Mom and Nora stared up from the cot, their happiness mocking me. I wanted to call Nora to demand why she'd stuck me in this wreck instead of her home, but the thought of her gruff voice dismissing me stopped me cold. I was alone, surrounded by ghosts of a past I didn't understand, and a future I couldn't see. Outside the village was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows. I stepped onto the porch, needing air. A woman walked by, her eyes lingering on the bakery, then on me. She whispered something to her companion, their laughter sharp in the night. My cheeks burned. Were they talking about me? The runaway bride? The fool who thought she'd found love? I went back inside, slamming the door, my breath short. I tried baking again, pulling out Nora's recipe for oatmeal cookies. My hands moved mechanically, measuring flour, cracking eggs. The dough was too sticky, clinging to my fingers like my thoughts. David's laugh, Greg's smirk, my father's cold voice, they swirled together louder with each stir. I slammed the bowl down, flour puffing into the air. Why had I trusted them? Why had I let myself believe I was enough? Lucas poked his head in his toolbox. Packed. Windows are set, he said, his voice cautious. You okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He lingered like he wanted to say more, but I turned away, pretending to check the oven. He left the door clicking shut. His kindness only made the loneliness sharper. I slid the cookies in the heat washing over my face, but it didn't warm the cold inside me. My phone buzzed again, a text this time. Hannah. Abigail, please talk to me. David says you're overreacting. What happened? I stared at the words, my chest tightening. Even Hannah, my best friend since high school, was buying his story. I typed a reply, then deleted it. What was the point? No one saw the truth, not even her. I was alone in this, and the weight of it was suffocating like the dust in this forgotten place. I pulled the cookies out, their edges charred. Another failure. I sank to the floor, the photo of Mom and Nora beside me. Their smiles felt like a lie, a reminder of everything I'd lost. David's betrayal was one thing, but my father's dismissal, Nora's distance, Hannah's doubt, they were piling up, each one a new bruise. I hugged my knees, the bakery silent, except for my ragged breathing. How much more could I take before I broke completely? The bakery's oven hummed its heat, doing nothing to thaw the cold knot in my chest. I'd stopped trying to bake, the charred cookies still sitting on the counter like evidence of my failures. I sat on the cot, the photo of Mom and Nora in my lap, their frozen smiles a cruel contrast to the chaos in my head. The silence was heavy, broken only by the creak of the old building settling. I'd ignored another call from Dad, his voice still echoing from the last message, calling me dramatic. I wasn't ready to face him or anyone. A sharp knock rattled the door, jarring me upright. My heart raced, expecting Lucas again, but the shadow outside was taller, familiar, in a way that made my stomach lurch. I opened the door, and there was David, his suit crisp, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. Abigail, he said, stepping inside before I could stop him. We need to talk. I backed up my hands, gripping the edge of the counter. Get out, I said, my voice low, trembling. The bakery felt smaller with him in it, his cologne sharp, invading the space. Abigail. Please, he said, his tone smooth. Practiced. You ran off without letting me explain. That bet. It was stupid, a dumb thing I said years ago. I love you. You know that. I laughed sharp and brittle, my nails digging into the wood. Years ago, I heard you at the church, David. You and Greg laughing like it was a game. My life was a game to you. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice soft. You're twisting it. I was drunk showing off. It didn't mean anything. Come home and we'll work this out. He reached for my arm, his touch light but possessive, like he still owned me. I jerked away, knocking over a stack of Nora's recipe cards. They scattered across the floor, some landing near his polished shoes. Don't touch me, I snapped. You don't get to walk in here and act like I'm the one who's wrong. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, the gesture so familiar it hurt. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Everyone's worried. Your dad, Hannah, me. We want you back. The mention of Dad stung a fresh wound. I opened my mouth to argue, but another knock cut me off. My heart sank as I recognized the heavy tread outside. I opened the door and there was Dad, his face stern, his coat dusted with road dirt. Abigail, he said, stepping in beside David. This has gone on long enough. I froze, trapped between them, the bakery walls closing in. You're here together. My voice cracked disbelief mixing with dread. What is this? Dad's eyes narrowed, his voice clipped. David called me. Said you're throwing away everything over a misunderstanding. I drove all night to bring you home. Home, I choked out, my hands shaking. You knew, didn't you, about the bet? You pushed me toward him knowing what he was. Dad's face didn't change, but his silence was deafening. David shifted his eyes, darting to Dad, a flicker of unease breaking his calm. Abigail, that's not fair, Dad said finally. David's a good match. I knew about some silly talk, but it was nothing serious. You're blowing this out of proportion. Nothing serious. My voice rose raw and ragged. He bet on marrying me for money. Dad, your money. And you let it happen. I stepped back, my hip hitting the counter, pain shooting through me. The photo of Mom and Nora lay on the floor, now half covered by a recipe card, and I felt like I was betraying her memory just by standing here. David spoke up, his voice sharper now. You're acting like I'm some villain. I didn't force you to say yes. You wanted this life, Abigail. I stared at him, my chest heaving. His words cut deeper than I expected, twisting the knife of self-doubt. Had I wanted it, the big wedding, the perfect future Dad always painted, or had I just followed their script, too scared to say no? The room spun, their faces blurring, and I felt the weight of every choice I'd ever made crashing down, threatening to bury me. My breath caught the bakery's stale air, choking me as Dad and David stood there, their presence a wall I couldn't climb. I clutched the counter's edge, my fingers brushing a cracked rolling pin, its weight solid in my shaking hand. Dad's eyes flicked to it, then back to me, his mouth a tight line. Put that down, Abigail, he said, like I was a child caught with something dangerous. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing myself. My voice broke loud in the small space. You let him use me, Dad. You knew he didn't love me, and you still pushed me down that aisle. My words spilled out raw and jagged, each one tearing at the silence. David shifted his polished shoes, scuffing the dusty floor, but he didn't speak. His silence felt like confirmation, and it burned. Dad stepped closer, his voice low, controlled. You needed stability, Abigail. After your mother died, you were a mess. David's family offered a future I couldn't give you. I did what was best. His words landed like a slap, rewriting every memory of him tucking me in, promising I'd be okay. Had it all been a lie? I turned to David, my eyes burning. Say something. Tell me he's wrong. My voice trembled, begging for a shred of truth to hold on to. He met my gaze, his face softening for a moment, and I hated how part of me still wanted to believe him. Abigail, he said, his tone almost gentle. Your dad's right. I saw a chance to build something for both of us. The bet was just talk. But yeah, your family's money made it easier. He shrugged like it was nothing, like my heart wasn't splitting open. You were happy, weren't you, until you decided to run. I staggered back, the rolling pin slipping from my hand, clattering to the floor. Happy. The word felt like a mockery, twisting every moment I'd spent with him, every late-night talk, every laugh into something hollow. I saw us at dinners with Dad, his proud nods, their shared glances I'd ignored. They'd planned this, both of them, and I'd been too blind to see it. The door creaked open, and I flinched, expecting Lucas or Nora, but it was Hannah. Her eyes widened, taking in my tear-streaked face, the rolling pin on the floor, David and Dad standing like judges. "Abigail, what's going on?" she asked, her voice soft but uncertain. I wanted to run to her to spill everything, but her earlier text flashed in my mind. Her doubt, her belief in David's lies. "You didn't believe me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You think I'm overreacting, don't you?" She hesitated, glancing at David, and that pause was a knife. "I just want you to be okay," she said, but it sounded weak, like she was choosing sides. I felt the ground shift beneath me, the last piece of my old life crumbling. Voices drifted in from outside, villagers passing by, their murmurs, sharp and curious. "That's her, the one who ran," someone said, loud enough to carry. "Poor thing, didn't even make it to the vows." Laughter followed, cutting through the bakery's walls, each word a public branding of my shame. I pictured them at the diner, swapping stories about the fool in the wedding dress, their pity worse than scorn. I turned back to Dad and David, my vision blurring with tears. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Both of you." Dad opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "No, I'm done." I grabbed the photo of Mom and Nora, clutching it to my chest, and stumbled to the back room. I slammed the door, the lock clicking, and sank to the floor, my sobs muffled against my knees. The world outside kept turning, but I was trapped in this moment, broken open, with nowhere left to hide. The bakery was silent now, the echo of Dad and David's footsteps long gone. I sat on the floor, the photo of Mom and Nora still pressed against my chest, my tears drying into a dull ache. Their words. Dad's cold pragmatism, David's casual betrayal, Hannah's hesitations swirled in my head, each one a weight I couldn't carry anymore. But something shifted, a spark beneath the hurt. I couldn't keep hiding in this dusty shell of a place, letting their choices define me. I stood, my legs shaky, and set the photo gently on the cot. The bakery's bare walls stared back, but for the first time I saw possibility instead of ruin. Nora's recipe cards, scattered from my fight with David, caught my eye. I knelt, gathering them, each one a piece of her and Mom's legacy. I wasn't a baker, but I'd watched them as a kid, their hands kneading dough, their laughter filling the air. Maybe I could start there. I pulled out a card for blueberry muffins, simple enough to try. The ingredients were listed in Nora's neat script, her confidence in every loop. I rummaged through the pantry, finding half-empty bags of flour and sugar, a jar of dried blueberries Nora must have left. My hands moved on instinct, measuring, mixing the rhythm, steadying my breath. The act felt like defiance, a quiet refusal to let David's betrayal or Dad's dismissal be the end of my story. The oven creaked as I slid the tray, and the warmth spreading through the chilly room. I leaned against the counter, watching the muffins rise, their scent soft and promising. For a moment I felt Mom's presence, her gentle encouragement from years ago when I'd helped her bake. I wasn't just running anymore. I was choosing something, even if it was small. A knock broke my thoughts. Lucas stood at the door, his toolbox back in hand. "Heard some commotion earlier," he said, his eyes scanning my face. "You okay?" I nodded, wiping flour from my hands. "Better. Trying something new." I gestured to the oven, a shy smile tugging at my lips. He raised an eyebrow, stepping inside. "Baking, didn't see that coming." His tone was light, but his gaze held something deeper, like he saw the shift in me. "Neither did I." I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "But I'm tired of falling apart." He set his toolbox down, pulling out a tape measure. "Mind if I fix that loose shelf? Might help with your new project." He didn't wait for an answer, moving to the back wall, his presence calm but not intrusive. "Thanks," I said, meaning it. His quiet support felt different from Sarah's or Diane's, less fleeting, more like a promise. As he worked, I checked the muffins, their tops golden now. I pulled them out the tray warm in my hands and set them to cool. They weren't perfect, but they were mine. I grabbed a notebook from my duffel, an old one I'd used for sketching years ago before Dad convinced me it was a waste of time. I started writing a letter to him, my pen moving fast. Dad, I wrote, I'm not coming back. You chose David's future over mine, and I'm done living for your approval. The words poured out raw but clear, each one a step toward reclaiming myself. Lucas glanced over, noticing the notebook. Writing a manifesto, he asked, a half-smile on his face. Something like that, I said, closing the book. Setting some boundaries. He nodded, hammering a nail into the shelf. Good. You deserve that. His words were simple, but they landed like a lifeline, pulling me forward. The muffins cooled their scent, filling the bakery, and I felt a flicker of pride. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I looked around the broken windows. Lucas had fixed the recipe cards, now neatly stacked. This place wasn't home yet, but it could be. I was done letting their voices drown out mine. For the first time in days, I felt a quiet strength building, like dough rising, ready to take shape. The bakery smelled of warm blueberries. The muffins cooling on the counter, their imperfect shapes, a quiet victory. Lucas's hammer tapped rhythmically, securing the shelf, and I felt a strange calm watching him work. My notebook lay open, the letter to Dad, unfinished but burning in my mind. I'd stopped mid-sentence, the weight of my words settling in. I wasn't just setting boundaries. I was carving out a space for myself, one they couldn't touch. I picked up another of Nora's recipe cards, this one for lavender bread, a recipe I'd never seen her make. The idea felt bold, risky, like stepping into uncharted territory. I scanned the pantry, finding a small jar of dried lavender, its scent faint but sharp. I measured it carefully, mixing it with flour and yeast, my hands steady now. Each stir felt like a choice, a way to claim this broken-down place as mine. I kneaded the dough, my fingers sinking into its softness, and for the first time in days, I wasn't thinking of David or Dad. Lucas finished the shelf, wiping his hands on his jeans. That's sturdy now, he said, stepping back. He glanced at the dough, curiosity in his eyes. Lavender, that's new. Yeah, I said, shaping the loaf. Something different. I didn't explain, but his nod felt like he understood. He lingered, leaning against the counter, and I realized I didn't mind his presence. It wasn't pushy, just there, like the steady hum of the oven. I was thinking, I said, my voice quiet but firm, about selling these at the market. The muffins, maybe this bread. Test the waters. His eyebrows lifted, a slow smile spreading. That's a move. Village folks love their baked goods, but they're picky. You up for it? I hesitated, the weight of judgment creeping in. I pictured the villagers from last night, their whispers cutting through the dark. But then I thought of Mom, her hands dusted with flour, teaching me to roll dough when I was 6. She'd believed in this place and Nora in me. I have to try, I said, meeting his gaze. I can't keep hiding. He nodded, grabbing his toolbox. Let me know when you're ready. I'll help carry stuff to the market. He headed out, leaving the door ajar, the morning air slipping in. I slid the lavender bread into the oven, its scent already rising, unfamiliar but promising. I turned back to my notebook, picking up the pen. The letter to Dad flowed now, each word deliberate. You made choices for me, I wrote, but I'm making my own now. Don't call me. Don't come here. I'm building something without you. I sealed the envelope, my hands steady, and set it aside to mail later. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was clarity. The market was tomorrow, and I spent the afternoon prepping, baking another batch of muffins and a second loaf of lavender bread. My hands moved with purpose, the motions grounding me. I found an old chalkboard in the back, its frame chipped but solid. I wrote Abigail's Bakes in careful letters, the name feeling like a claim. I wasn't Nora, wasn't Mom, but I could be something new. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the fixed windows, I packed the baked goods into a basket. The village market would be my first step, a chance to face the whispers head-on. I thought of Lucas's quiet encouragement, Nora's recipes, Mom's photo. They weren't here, but they were with me in every choice I made. I stood in the center of the bakery, the lavender bread cooling beside the muffins, the chalkboard leaning against the wall. My heart beat steady, not racing anymore. I wasn't whole yet, but I was moving. I picked up the rolling pin from the floor, its weight familiar now, and set it on the counter. It wasn't a weapon, it was a tool. I looked at it then at the letter to Dad, and felt a quiet resolve settle in like the last note of a song, strong and sure. The market morning was crisp, the village square buzzing with voices and the clink of coins. My basket of muffins and lavender bread sat on a borrowed table, the chalkboard sign proclaiming Abigail's Bakes in my shaky handwriting. I stood behind it, my stomach tight, scanning the faces of passers-by. Some glanced curiously, others hurried past, their eyes skimming over me like I was just another stall. I smoothed my apron, a plain one I'd found in the bakery, and tried to smile, but it felt brittle. A woman paused, her scarf bright against the gray morning. She picked up a muffin, turning it over in her hands. "You're new," she said, her voice neutral, but her eyes sharp. "Nora's niece, right?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, trying to bring the bakery back." My words felt small, but she bought 2 muffins, dropping coins into my jar. It was a start, a tiny crack of light in the weight I'd been carrying. More people stopped, drawn by the lavender bread's unusual scent. A man with a weathered face sniffed a loaf, muttering, "Never seen this before." He bought one, and I felt a flicker of pride, like I'd done something right. By noon, the basket was half empty, the coins piling up. I let myself hope just a little that this could work. Then I saw Margaret, the local baker, weaving through the crowd. Her stall was across the square, piled high with perfect pastries. She stopped, her eyes narrowing as she read my sign. "Abigail's Bakes," she said loud enough for others to turn. "You think you can just show up and take over? This village doesn't need another baker." My face burned, but I held her gaze. "I'm not taking anything. I'm just trying to start over." My voice was steady, surprising me. A few people watched, their murmurs low, but Margaret huffed and walked away, leaving a sting in the air. I busied myself rearranging the bread, trying to shake off her words. Lucas appeared, carrying a crate of apples for another vendor. He glanced at my table, then at Margaret's retreating figure. "She's just scared," he said, setting the crate down. "Her shop's been the only one for years. Give it time." I nodded, but her accusation clung to me, feeding the doubt I'd been fighting. Was I an outsider here, stirring up trouble? I pushed the thought down, focusing on the next customer, a young woman who smiled as she bought a loaf. "This smells amazing," she said, and I clung to her kindness like a lifeline. Back at the bakery, I counted the coins, enough to buy fresh ingredients for another batch. I was setting out flour when a letter slid under the door, the handwriting sharp and unfamiliar. I opened it, my hands steady, until I saw David's signature. The ring, it read, "is a family heirloom. Return it or I'll take legal action. Let's end this cleanly." A prepaid envelope was tucked inside, cold and formal. I stared at the ring on my finger, its diamond catching the dim light. I'd forgotten it was there, a leftover from a life I no longer wanted. His threat felt like a slap, reducing our years together to a legal demand. I slid the ring off my finger, bare and light, and dropped it into the envelope. I wrote a single line on a scrap of paper, "It's over." I sealed it, my heart pounding, not with anger but with a strange, hollow relief. As I set the envelope by the door, ready to mail, I heard footsteps outside. I froze, expecting David again, but it was Nora, her coat dusted with frost. She stepped inside, her eyes sweeping over the tidied bakery, the trays of fresh bread. "You've been busy," she said, her voice gruff, but softer than I expected. "I had to do something," I said, my hands still gripping the envelope. "Why didn't you let me stay with you?" She looked away, her jaw tight. "You needed this place, Abigail. Not my couch. You needed to stand on your own." Her words were heavy, not cruel, but final, like a door closing. I wanted to argue, to ask why she'd left me to drown in this mess, but her eyes held something I couldn't read. Pride, maybe, or guilt. The bakery was quiet, the air thick with unspoken truths, and I stood there, caught between my small victories and the weight of her choice, feeling like I was still falling. Nora's words hung in the air, heavy as the scent of fresh bread cooling on the counter. I stood there, the envelope with David's ring still in my hand, its weight gone but its shadow lingering. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, held mine for a moment before she turned to the chalkboard sign, Abigail's Bakes, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You're really doing this," she said, her voice low, almost a question. I nodded, my throat tight. I had to. I wanted her to see it, to understand why I'd poured myself into this place. But her gaze drifted to the photo of her and Mom propped against a flower tin. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the edge, and for a second, I saw something soft in her face, something I hadn't seen in years. "You look like her," she said almost to herself. "Stubborn, too." She set the photo down, her hands moving to her coat pockets, avoiding me. "This place was hers, you know, before she got sick. She wanted it to be yours one day." My chest ached, a new kind of hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice was quiet, but it carried every question I'd buried since I got here. Why the bakery? Why not her home? Why leave me to figure this out alone? Nora shrugged her shoulders stiff. "You weren't ready. Still not sure you are." She turned toward the door, pausing. "Keep going, kid. But don't expect it to be easy." She left her boots crunching on the gravel outside, the sound fading into the night. I sank onto a stool, the envelope crinkling in my grip. Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I wasn't ready, not for this bakery, not for the weight of Mom's dreams. But I'd started something, and the market had proved it wasn't nothing. I mailed the envelope to David the next morning, the post office clerk's bored nod, a strange relief. It was done. He was gone. Back at the bakery, word had spread. People trickled in, curious, their faces, a mix of skepticism and intrigue. A man in a flannel jacket bought a loaf, saying, "Heard you're giving Margaret a run for her money." His tone was light, but it carried an edge, like I was stirring trouble I didn't understand. Margaret's shadow loomed larger that afternoon. I overheard two women outside, their voices low but clear. "She's not even from here," one said. "Thinks she can just take over Nora's old place." The other laughed, sharp and mean. "Bet she'll be gone by spring." My hands froze on the dough I was kneading, the words sinking in like stones. I wanted to shout back to prove them wrong, but doubt crept in, cold and familiar. Lucas stopped by later, his hands dusty from a day's work. "Heard you did well at the market," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Folks are talking." "Not all good," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "Margaret's got them thinking I'm stealing her business." He frowned, his eyes narrowing. "She's spreading that around. Said it at the diner yesterday, loud enough for everyone to hear." He paused, studying me. "You're tougher than that, though." Right? I wanted to say yes, but the weight of Margaret's words, Nora's distance, the village's whispers pressed down. I nodded anyway, forcing a smile. Trying to be. He left, promising to spread the word about my bread, but the bakery felt emptier after he was gone. I baked another batch, the motions automatic now, but my mind churned. A girl, maybe 8, came in with her mom, her eyes wide as she pointed at the muffins. "Can we get one?" she asked, her voice bright. I handed her one free and she grinned, leaving a folded drawing on the counter, a crayon sketch of the bakery labeled Happy Place. I pinned it to the wall, its colors stark against the peeling paint. It should have warmed me, but it didn't. Nora's words. Margaret's accusations, the village's murmurs, they circled relentless. I'd taken a stand, but the world was pushing back, and I wasn't sure I could hold my ground. The bakery was quiet in the early dawn, the first light slipping through the windows Lucas had fixed. I stood at the counter, rolling out dough for a new batch of cinnamon apple tarts, the recipe born from a faint memory of Mom's favorite dessert. The air smelled of spice and yeast, warm and steady, like a promise I was starting to believe in. 6 months had passed since I'd fled my wedding, and the ache in my chest had softened, not gone, but different, like a bruise fading. I worked alone, the village still asleep outside. The rhythm of kneading grounded me, my hands finding a confidence I hadn't known I could have. The crayon drawing from that little girl Lily hung on the wall, its bright colors, a quiet reminder of the people who'd started to see me, not just the runaway bride. I'd sold out at the market again last weekend, the coins in my jar heavier each time. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I paused, wiping flour from my fingers, and glanced at the corner where I'd stashed a small box of Mom's things found last week, behind a rusted oven. I'd been too raw to open it before, but now, with the bakery humming around me, I felt ready. I pulled it out, the cardboard soft with age, and lifted the lid. Inside was a journal, its leather cover worn but intact. Mom's initials etched on the front. I opened it, my breath catching at her handwriting, sharp and familiar. The first page was dated years before I was born, her words spilling out about the bakery, her dreams for it. This place could be home, she wrote, a place where people gather, where Abigail could grow. My eyes stung, not with pain but with something softer, a connection I hadn't expected. She'd seen this for me long before I'd stumbled here. I set the journal down, my hands trembling slightly, and went back to the tarts. The dough was smooth now, ready to shape. I cut it into circles, pressing apple slices into each one, the act deliberate, like I was piecing myself together. Mom's words stayed with me, her belief in this place in me. I wasn't just rebuilding a bakery. I was rebuilding what I thought I could be. Lucas knocked his silhouette familiar through the glass. I let him in, the cool morning air following. "Early start," he said, eyeing the tarts. "Smells good." "Trying something new," I said, sliding the tray into the oven. "There's a festival tomorrow. Figured I'd bring these." He grinned, leaning against the counter. "You're becoming a regular around here. Folks are starting to talk about Abigail's Bakes, not just Nora's old place." I smiled, the warmth of his words settling in. "Still feels strange being seen like that." "You're earning it," he said, his voice steady. "Takes guts to start over." He didn't linger, just grabbed a broom to sweep the porch, his help quiet but constant. I watched him through the window, the village waking up beyond. The festival would be my biggest test yet, a chance to stand in the open, not as the woman who ran, but as someone building something real. I thought of Mom's journal, her dreams for this place, and felt a quiet strength growing, like the tarts rising in the oven. I wasn't there yet, but I was closer, my breath slowing, my heart steady, ready to face whatever came next. The oven's warmth lingered as the cinnamon apple tarts cooled, their golden edges catching the morning light. I stood by the counter, Mom's journal open beside me, her words a quiet anchor. Lucas swept the porch, outside, his movements steady, the broom's soft scrape blending with the village waking up. I traced a line in the journal, Mom's hope for this bakery for me, written years before I'd lost her. It felt like she was here, guiding my hands as I shaped each tart. I packed the tarts into baskets for the festival, my fingers careful, deliberate. The village square would be crowded today, filled with faces that knew my story or thought they did. I wasn't the runaway bride anymore, not entirely, but I wasn't sure who I was either. The thought didn't scare me like it used to. I was finding my way, one small step at a time. Nora came by, her coat buttoned against the autumn chill. She didn't knock, just stepped inside, her eyes scanning the tarts, the tidy counter, Lily's drawing on the wall. "You've made this place yours," she said, her voice gruff but warm, like she was seeing me for the first time. I nodded, stacking baskets. "Trying to. Mom wanted this, didn't she?" I gestured to the journal, my voice soft. Nora's face tightened, then softened. "She did. Wanted it for you too. I should have told you sooner." She paused, her hands in her pockets. "I pushed you here because I knew you could do it. You're stronger than you think." Her words settled over me, not heavy but grounding. I wanted to ask more about Mom, about why Nora stayed so distant, but I let it go. Some answers didn't need saying. I handed her a tart, still warm. "For the road," I said, meeting her eyes. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, and smiled, small but real. "See you at the festival," she said, then left the door, closing softly behind her. I turned back to the journal, flipping to a new page. Mom had written about the village, how it held her together after hard days. "People show up," she wrote, "not always how you expect, but they do." I thought of Lucas, Lily, even the woman in the scarf at the market. They were showing up piece by piece, and I was letting them. The festival was hours away, but I felt ready, not for applause or approval, but for whatever came. I cleaned the counter, the cloth moving in slow circles, and caught my reflection in a polished baking tray. My eyes were clearer, my face less haunted. I wasn't the girl who ran from the church, nor the one who hid in this bakery. I was something new still forming, but real. I stepped outside, the air sharp with autumn leaves. The village glowed under the morning sun, houses nestled against the hills, smoke curling from chimneys. Lucas waved from the porch, his broom leaning against the wall. I waved back, my breath visible in the cool air, and felt the world slow. The hurt was still there, a quiet scar, but it didn't own me anymore. I was here in this moment, and that was enough. 6 months had passed since I'd fled to this village, and the bakery now hummed with life. The morning was soft sunlight spilling over the counter, where I arranged fresh loaves, their crusts crisp from the oven. Nora walked in her boots, heavy on the polished floor, and stopped, her eyes wide. The shelves were stocked, the air rich with the scent of bread and coffee. Lily's drawing hung framed above the register, joined by others from kids who'd started calling this place home. "You've done it," Nora said, her voice low, almost disbelieving. She ran a hand along the counter, now smooth and clean, no trace of the dust I'd found that first night. "I was gonna sell this place, you know. Thought it was dead. But you brought it back." I smiled, setting down a tray of rolls. "I want to buy it," I said, the words steady, practiced. I'd saved every coin from the market, every sale from the shop. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. This is mine now. Nora's eyes softened, a rare warmth breaking through. "Your mom would have loved this," she said, and for the first time her voice held no distance. She reached into her bag, pulling out a folded cloth, worn but clean. "Found this in my attic." It was hers. I unfolded it, my breath catching. It was Mom's apron, faded blue with tiny embroidered flowers, the kind she'd worn when I was a kid. I slipped it on the fabric, soft against my skin, like a hug I'd almost forgotten. Nora nodded, then turned to leave, her steps lighter than I'd ever seen. The bakery filled as the morning grew, villagers stopping by for their usual orders. A woman named Grace, who'd bought my first lavender bread, lingered to chat about her garden. A man in a trucker hat tipped his cap, calling me by name. They didn't see the runaway bride anymore. They saw me, Abigail, the baker who'd stayed. I moved through the day, my hands steady as I bagged loaves, poured coffee, wiped tables. The rhythm was mine now, not just a way to survive, but a life I'd chosen. I thought of the festival months ago, where I'd stood nervous behind my table, and how far I'd come. The whispers had faded, replaced by familiar faces, small nods, quiet trust. By afternoon, the shop was quiet, the last customer gone. I sat on a stool, Mom's apron still tied around me, and opened her journal to a page I hadn't read. "You don't need to be perfect," she'd written. "Just keep going. The world meets you halfway." I traced the words, my fingers steady, and felt her with me, not as a ghost, but as a truth I'd finally claimed. I looked around the bakery, glowing in the soft light, its walls no longer a cage, but a home. I wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding. I'd built something real, piece by piece, and it was enough. I took a slow breath, the air warm with the day's baking, and felt the past settle, not gone, but quiet like a book I'd finally closed. The bakery's windows glowed as dusk settled, casting soft shadows across the wooden floor. I leaned against the counter, Mom's apron still tied around me, its faint scent of lavender and thyme grounding me. I'd closed up early, the day's rush, fading into a quiet hum. In the stillness, I pulled out Mom's journal again, flipping to the final page. Her words were simple, written in a hurried scrawl. "Love yourself enough to start again, Abigail. It's never too late." My throat tightened, not with pain, but with a warmth that felt like home. I thought of the months behind me, the church where I'd stood broken, the nights spent scrubbing this place clean. I'd faced David's betrayal, Dad's coldness, the village's whispers, and somehow I'd kept going. Not because I was fearless, but because I'd learned to trust the small steps, kneading dough, greeting customers, smiling at Lily's drawings. Each one had built this life, not perfect, but mine. Lucas stopped by, his jacket slung over one shoulder, a quiet smile on his face. "Heard you're buying the place," he said, leaning in the doorway. "Big move." I nodded, folding the journal shut. "Feels right. I'm not running anymore." My voice was steady, carrying a strength I'd earned. He didn't need to know the details, but his nod told me he saw it, the change in me. Margaret came in next, her steps hesitant, a paper bag in her hands. "Made you something," she said, setting it down. Inside was a small loaf, her recipe, not mine. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, her voice gruff but honest. "You're good for this place." I took the loaf, its warmth surprising me. "Thanks," I said, meeting her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. She left, and I felt the weight of her words, not as a burden, but as a bridge. That evening I hosted a small gathering in the bakery tables, pushed together, candles flickering. Villagers came, faces I'd grown to know graced the trucker kids with new drawings. I shared my story, not the polished version, but the messy truth, the wedding, the hurt, the slow climb back. They listened, some nodding, others quiet their eyes, holding their own stories. Lucas sat in the back, his presence steady, and when I finished, the room clapped, soft but real. I looked at them, at the bakery I'd made mine, and felt whole, not because the pain was gone, but because I'd built something stronger around it. Mom's apron, the journal, this place. They were my roots now, deeper than I'd ever expected. I wasn't the girl who ran. I was the woman who stayed. What moment made you realize you could start again? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for being here, for listening. Here's to finding our way, one step at a time.